Hello, this is Doug Gerlach from iClubcentral. Welcome to our Investment Club webinar. Today is May 18th, 2021. And tonight we're going to cover the occasional duties of the Investment Club treasurer. What are the tasks that you might not need to undertake on a monthly or even quarterly basis, but that you should be aware of when the time rolls around that you do need to undertake some of these tasks and transactions. So that's what we're going to cover tonight. There is a PDF of the handout available in the handouts tab of the webinar application, so you can save that PDF for future reference. And when we archive this on YouTube, you'll also find a link in the description that will allow you to download that PDF handout as well. Before we begin, I'll be joined tonight by Russell Malley and Sean Poolrang, who are our top investment club experts on the support side for my iClub and iClubcentral. Many of you are familiar with both Russell and Sean. They might be chiming in with some additional feedback as we go along. We've been continuing after the conclusion of the tax season for investment clubs to work on the My iClub application, and we've been rolling out new reports and new features and new tweaks, and we continue this month with a couple of brief announcements to some enhancements to the tools on My iClub. One of these is we have modified the portfolio gain loss report to allow you to see the percentage gains for each tax lot in a security, as well as the overall percentage gain or loss for the entirety of your holdings of an individual security. So that allows you to see if you made multiple purchases, you can see how much you've gained or lost for each of those purchases. We made an adjustment to the online voting that allows the ballots to be kept open until all members have voted, even if a majority has been reached. When we implemented the voting tool and allowed clubs to create ballots and have members vote on them electronically and tabulate the results, we included a feature that allowed the ballots to be closed as soon as a majority was reached. The intention of that was for taking care of quick matters that required action in between meetings, where you might not want to wait for every single member to vote, but you really wanted to know once you had a majority so that you could go ahead and take action. But some clubs objected to that and felt that every member should be allowed to vote, even if their vote was irrelevant after a certain point. So we have now accommodate that. So we've changed up the options in the voting module a little bit. You can enter an end date, and then you can select whether the ballot is only closes before that date if all members have voted or if a majority has been reached. So if you leave it to default, it will always allow every member to cast a ballot before the end date of that particular motion. So that's a change in the online voting tool. And we've also made a little tweak to the portfolio review report. We had subsequent to our release of the ability to link members' SSG Plus stock studies completed on the Better Investing website to their My iClub Investment Club, we have been tweaking some of those reports to display some of the data that's not as related to specific SSG judgment. So we are making some modifications to those reports for clubs for which their members are not using the SSG Plus tool, although that will remain our primary focus. So the portfolio review report, one of the default judgment items that we were using was comparing the recent growth of profits, sales, and earnings to the analyst's estimate of future growth. And so we have adjusted that now. If you're using a linked stock selection guide, we will use the projected growth rate from that stock selection guide. So that's a little tweak to that portfolio review report. We are continuing to kind of work through some of the issues that have cropped up related to that SSG Plus link, but we've gotten a lot of positive feedback on it as well, so we appreciate that. If you do have suggestions, we are always looking for, and in fact, the top two items on this this list of recent tweaks all come from user suggestions, so we welcome your feedback. So now let's talk about the occasional duties of the club treasurer. And some of these are going to be related to the club administrator. Now, you may be a treasurer and not be an administrator. We'll talk about the differences a little bit later. So some of these things you might not have direct access to if you're not an administrator. However, I know that a lot of club treasurers also serve in that administrator role for their My iClub website. So we're going to talk about 5 different categories of occasional duties. We're going to talk about administrative tasks. We're going to talk about tasks and transactions related to your cash accounts. We're going to talk about member-related tasks, security transactions, and then finally some tips on troubleshooting that you might use on an occasional basis. And as I mentioned, these are all the types of tasks that you undertake so infrequently in many cases that you forget how to do them from time to time. So it means to be a little bit of a refresher for you. Others you might not be aware of. We'll start with the administrative tasks. One of the most important things you can do as a club treasurer is maintain a consistent backup routine to back up your club's data. So we've got a backup manager that's in the accounting utilities section, and that's where you can periodically save an online backup of your club data. So that's very important. That will save a snapshot of your club as of a particular point in time. Then you can recover from that. It'll wipe out all of the club's data, and with the data in the backup, you can download that. That's the second task that you can undertake periodically to save your club's data to a secure local location like an USB drive or emailed to a secure email account. You can email that file. But in this way, you're going to make sure that you've got access to a backup when you need it. Now, the whole function of this online backup manager is to protect you from mistakes. It's not to protect your club from our servers crashing. We've got a redundant disk array set up so that and regular backups as well, so that our entire database of club transactions for thousands of clubs are all protected in that way. So if our servers were to go down, your data would be protected. We'd be able to restore it to the point right before the severe event would have occurred. But the online backup utility is meant for you to protect your club from mistakes that come when you miss key transactions and you don't notice it. You try to wind things back, you come back, you delete the wrong transaction, and before you know it, you've gone down this hole, this rabbit hole of continued mistakes that it's impossible to recover from. Maybe you are undertaking one of the tasks that we're going to talk about tonight that's so occasional that you don't recall how to do it. You do it incorrectly, you spot the problem, you try to unwind it, you try to delete it. So we always suggest when you're taking action to enter a particular type of transaction that might be a little trickier, come to the backup manager, make a backup as of that point in time. Then you know that if you do make a mistake, instead of having to delete it and roll back, you can just come back and recover your backup. It takes you right back to the point you were maybe an hour before, but you'll know that all the data was accurate up to that point. So the backup manager is meant to do that. Now, we've also had experiences where clubs weren't properly permissioned. We're going to talk about that later. So a club of 12 people had 5 people who had treasurer privileges who didn't all recognize it. And one of them didn't know that when he hit the delete button, it was wiping out all the transactions for that he was viewing at the time. And so this is not a problem with our software. It's not a problem that we created. All that we could do with them is say, go back to your backup manager and restore a recent accurate backup, and then you'll be able to move forward from that point. So the backup manager is very, very useful, something that you should be thinking about. And I will tell you, but this is a measure of last resort, that we do automatically back up your club's data essentially every 90 days if you don't do it. So we're gonna, because this just saves us headaches when we hear from clubs that are experiencing massive data problems because of errors on their part. They don't like to hear that we tell them that they should have backed up their data, and they didn't. So the backup function is there. And it is for your protection. Bonnie asks, is cloud storage such as Dropbox secure for a backup? Yeah, I think that would be fine. You know, there's not a whole lot of sensitive information necessarily in the club data. For instance, it doesn't include account numbers, may or may not include social security numbers. So you can keep that in mind. But yes, if you wanted to save that file to your computer and then save it to a secured cloud storage, especially if it's an encrypted cloud storage service, that would be fine. We always recommend at least having, you know, maybe once a year at year end after you've reconciled the books, saving a physical copy of the medium that you put in your, if you've got a fireproof safe in your home or a safety deposit box. Even if it's 2 years old, that's a lot better than having to re-enter, you know, 3 years or 4 years of data. So even on an annual basis, the rule of thumb is how much data would you like to re-enter by hand in case of a catastrophic event? So if you have a club with a lot of members and a lot of transactions, 3 or 4 months of data entry is going to take you some time. On the other hand, we've had people who've reconstructed 10 or 15 years of history when they converted to the My iClub or Club Accounting 3 program, and so they might be comfortable with that level. But just keep that in mind, and the backup function is there for your protection. Now we're going to talk about the cash account tasks and cash transactions. One of the very useful things that you can do in the default, in the cash account section. So we're in accounting and we're in the cash section. And when you click on cash accounts, you can edit the account name. So instead of using the default bank or broker, you could actually call it by Fidelity or Schwab or Wells Fargo or Chase or whatever the name of your bank is or brokerage firm. Change the name of the account, and that can make things easier for you to recognize which account transactions were happening from. When you're entering them, makes it easier sometimes to know that, okay, I'm working with a brokerage account, so I got to make sure that brokerage account is always the one that I select. Of course, if you only have one account, that's less of an issue for you. And there's no reason that you have to differentiate. If you change from Fidelity to Schwab, for instance, you don't necessarily have to create a new account for the new broker and transfer the transactions or transfer the balances, the current number of shares and the account balances from the old account to the new account. You can simply rename the account because we're not doing anything that's so specific. But we really leave it up to you. If you are running a lot of different transactions in a number of different accounts, then of course it might be more useful for you to have them labeled accordingly. But something that you might not be aware of, you can also mark as a default. So if you find out that most of your transactions are really happening in one account or the other, you can select that as the default account, and then that appears first when you're entering the cash transactions. You can also mark accounts inactive from here, and there's a button at the bottom to show inactive accounts. So it's something that you don't really use that often, and maybe you set it and forget it, and that's great, but you should be aware that it's there, and you can make it work as you would like to see it working. The expense transaction screen is pretty straightforward. You might not have that many expenses throughout the course of a year related to the operation of your investment club. The important thing here is make sure to select the type, whether it's an investment expense or a non-investment expense. Now, this does not affect, in most cases, the individual partner's tax reporting at year end anymore since the changes of tax regulations. However, we still do keep track of investment versus non-investment expense, both for a legacy basis. So if you're editing transactions that might have happened years ago, to keep things under in the realm of accuracy, as well as making sure that the club members know what the expenses are for, if they're for non-investment related items or investment related items. There's a what's this link there, and that will tell you more details about what constitutes an investment versus a non-investment expense. And so that's what you can refer to for that. Under distribution method, it's very important. And there are two options. One is by ownership share, and the other one is by member. And you should always, for all expenses, use the by ownership share distribution method, unless your partnership agreement specifically allows the by member distribution method for expenses. And that is really key. You don't want to be running afoul of IRS regulations, and you don't want to be arbitrarily deciding how expenses are handled in the program. And so your partnership agreement should, if it doesn't specify the method, the default is that all expenses are distributed by percentage ownership of each partner. And we've talked more about this. If this is a problem, any expense that you think should be distributed by member probably shouldn't be on your club's books. Is best handled outside the books. It's not an appropriate club expense if you feel like it really is not something that should be allocated by ownership share. So that's the only kind of gotcha here. And there is a what's this link as well that will give you more on our approach to recording expenses. The record interest screen is pretty straightforward. Their only options here is to select whether it's a taxable or a tax-free status for that interest income. And for the vast majority of clubs, this would be taxable. And if you are one of those clubs that has selected a tax-free interest vehicle, it's probably not worth it, the extra work that it's going to take to kind of reconcile that tax-free interest. You're not generating enough interest income for your partnership or your partners to really justify having to report the tax-free portion on members' K1s. Nobody's going to get more than $0.25 or $1 worth of tax benefit from it. It's just not worth it in this low interest rate environment. So that's the only gotcha on the record interest transaction. Now, the record income transaction is very rarely used in the cash account section. This is for miscellaneous income that is not related to a specific security. So it's not related, it's not a dividend, it's not a return of capital or a capital gain, it's not cash that was paid out by a security, unless it may be used for a partnership or a master limited partnership or a limited partnerships distributions, which might include actual income. We discourage those types of securities, but that would be one instance where you might possibly use this screen. And it's important to recognize, because any income that you report here is going to be distributed to partners and will be they'll pay taxes on this income at their ordinary rate, the ordinary income rate on which they're paying taxes on any other miscellaneous income they have, which is generally going to be higher than the capital gains rate that they will pay, or other advantaged rates. So the record account income, very rarely used, and there are very few scenarios in which we can envision most better investing style investment clubs using it. Now, we also have a charitable contributions screen that allows you to record gifts of cash or securities to a qualifying charity. And when the club makes this kind of contribution, the members receive a credit for that donation at year end. Now, we've had clubs that make a donation to the church or library where they hold meetings, and that is quite often a good idea, and it's a way to kind of pay back the generosity of those facilities by making a donation at the end of the year, and so that's possible. If you are making donations and you have securities that have appreciated significantly, this can be a great way to divest some of your holdings in that highly appreciated security. You receive for the donation amount the value of the security on the date that you gift it to a qualifying organization, and nobody pays. The capital gains are wiped out. So it can be a really smart thing to do. If I can envision a club where they were all members of a single church, for instance, where they're all tithing on a regular basis, to incorporate a charitable contribution from their investment club, which would allow them to take advantage of the capital gains step up, or the cost basis step up, and kind of maximize the benefit of their contribution. So that might be another scenario. If you can see at the bottom there is a screen for a cash-only donation, or you can select stocks. And so generally this would be where you would select stocks that had a lower basis and higher unrealized gains for a charitable contribution. So something that you might want to think about in terms of your own investment club. So now let's take a look at some of the member tasks. Now, many of these are not exclusively tasks that the treasurer would undertake, but would be tasks that the administrator of the club would undertake. And so there's some differences in permissions there, but we'll assume that you are also serving in an administrative capacity. Now, when you add a member to My iClub, that's what we're talking about, adding a member to My iClub. There are two steps. One is to add the member, and this can be done on its own, where you just type in the member's name, boom, they are now a member. You can also set them up as a guest first and then move them into the membership category. But once they've been added as a member of the club, or simultaneously with being added as a member of the club, you can invite them, issue an invitation to them to set up their username and password to access your club site, and only your club site, on myiclub.com. So those are two discrete processes that you need to undertake. If you know the member's email address, as I said, you can do them both at the same time. So let's talk about them. If you go to the People tab in My iClub and click Add Member, you get a screen here where there is a text box that you can customize that will provide specific instructions. There is a list of name and email address fields. There are 10. You can add more if you were doing this for the first time and you were inviting a number of people to join the club's website. You could do them all at once, but you could also do it once at a time. There's an option to save the text as a default. So if you come up with a perfect welcome message, you can save that as the default, and it will be sent in the future with all the invitations that go out. So once you've entered the name and the email address here, you scroll to the bottom, you click OK, the invitation gets emailed to the member, and they now have instructions to click on a specific link that will take them back to the My iClub website on a page where they will create a username and establish their own password in order to access the website. So the treasurer or administrator of the club doesn't create the password, doesn't create the username. It's all driven by the email address. So you want to make sure that that's correct. And it's also good to know that the invitation is time limited. So it's going to expire if they don't accept it, and then it will have to be reissued. So you can reissue them as many times as possible. Often it is good to give members a heads up, watch for an email from My iClub that will give you the instructions for joining the club website. And so remind them, notify them separately, that send them a text, send them an email that says, I just issued this invitation. If you didn't get it, check your junk mail, your spam folder, because it's got the important instructions. And that's the only way that they can be added to your club. So every club controls their own membership. Now, if you've added members to the club, but you didn't have their email address, or they didn't accept the invitation, you can re-invite them. You can send invitations to current members. So you can see here, there are at least 3 members of this club that haven't accepted or that have not been invited online already. So you need to have the email addresses on this particular screen, fill that in. Again, you can edit the text above, scroll down, click OK, and they will receive another invitation. And again, that invitation will expire if they don't accept it. So they need to click on it, follow the prompts, and create their personal My iClub account. Now, something else that the administrator can do is reset members' passwords. And you probably, maybe you've experienced this, where someone in your club said, oh, I forgot my password to the club website. And it used to be that the only recourse was for that member to contact iClub support, and we would issue a password reset. So we delete their old password, send them an email with a special password that they could use to log in again, and change their password to something they could remember. So we gave this permission to the club administrator. So now the club administrator can reset members' passwords. So if the member says, oh, I forgot my password, the administrator logs in, goes to the people page, finds their name, looks for this little icon, which is the reset password icon, the little double arrow there, and click on that icon and follow the instructions. There's a warning that says that if you go ahead and click this, we're going to delete their password, their existing password, and their only way they're going to get on now is to create a new password for their existing account. So again, they're going to get an email, instructions to log in. So this is good to know, because you can do this during a club meeting when a member says, I forgot my password. And it might be the same member who forgot their password last month. You have the ability to reset their password anytime of the day or night, 24/7. You don't have to wait for our offices to be open for us to do it. So that's something occasional that you might want to make sure that you and your club know about it. Now you can also, the administrator also gets to edit member permissions. The edit icon looks like a little pencil there in the people tab. So you can click on that edit icon and then scroll to the bottom of their profile to their member positions. Now, members can edit their own member profile, put in their address, their phone numbers, their emergency contact, etc. The member position and permissions down at the bottom is for administrators to set the duties that each member is responsible for, can access, the features they can access on the website. Now, some of these have asterisks after them. Those are the default permissions that all members get. So for instance, in the manage message board section, all members can access the discussions and post, but not all members can delete messages posted by other members or create and delete message boards. So that is anything that's not asterisks is really meant to be assigned to someone in a responsible position, such as an administrator or other officer. We try to group these so that there are not so many different categories, and think about the way that a club would operate. So all of the treasurer duties at the top, the record accounting information / receive renewal notices, that is for the club treasurer. And so the treasurer needs that one to be checked, but no one else needs that one to be checked. Everyone can view the accounting information without having that permission. You might have a secretary who's in charge of the message boards and the file storage. The administrator might be responsible for inviting and ejecting members, and you might have a portfolio manager who's managing the stock watchers and the ballots. So we've tried to group them together, following some of the roles that traditionally investment clubs have assigned members to undertake. If all of the boxes are checked, that means this person is an administrator. And again, it's good to have an administrator and a backup administrator. But if every member of your club has all permissions, that means that any member of your club could delete the club, could delete data, could wipe out the club website entirely, could remove members, could wreak all sorts of havoc. So that's why it's important to understand the permissions and make sure they're set accordingly. It's also very good idea when roles change that you not only give the new partner the appropriate permissions, the new officer, the appropriate positions, but you also remove unneeded positions from prior partners, prior officers rather. As I mentioned earlier, we had an investment club of 12 or 15 members and 5 treasurers. And again, because they simply, when one treasurer took over from another, they didn't remove the treasurer permissions. And so the old treasurer didn't realize that they were what they were doing was affecting the entire club data. So, and again, there's going to be an overlap, but as club administrator, it's a good idea for you to make a note and say, well, we've just had an election, so there's going to be a month or two where the old treasurer is going to be passing things to the new treasurer. But after that 2 months, then we want to make sure to remove the permissions from the old treasurer. And again, not because you don't trust anyone, but if there's a way for things to get messed up, people are going to find it. So you want to minimize the risk as much as possible. Anyone with that managed treasurer duties at the top is considered a treasurer, regardless of what other permissions they might have. It's a good idea to audit these permissions on a periodic basis as well, just to make sure that everything is looking appropriate to your current mode of operation. Hey, Russell, you got some comments?
Yeah, there's a question about commenting on if people are in multiple clubs. So that should mean if an administrator in any of those clubs sends a new password, it's changed for all the clubs.
Oh,
because you use one username and password for access to all.
That is correct. So we like it when members have a single username and password, even if they belong to multiple clubs, because it's more secure than trying to manage 3 different usernames and passwords if you're in 3 different investment clubs. But yes, so when when the password is reset, it's reset for all of the clubs that a member might access on myiClub.com. So as I mentioned, good idea to review the member permissions periodically. One of the recent updates on the people page is that we have tabs that identify the treasurers as well as the administrators. So it's a real quick way that if you come to your treasurers tab and you see that you've got 4 treasurers, yes, the administrator is going to be a treasurer, and your treasurer is going to be administrator, or treasurer is going to be a treasurer. But beyond that, if people are no longer serving in that capacity, they don't need that permission. The administrator, again, if you must have at least one, and we won't let that administrator leave until someone else is set as the club administrator. So there is a little built-in check there, because we don't want you to be in a situation where you can't make changes. And so you can contact support and we can assist you if you've got a problem with an administrator, for instance, a single administrator in your club who passed away. Contact us and we can do some verification and make sure that your club gets access. So there is always a way, but we like to make sure that you are not granting permissions too broadly on the site for your members. The processing member withdrawals, again, is something that happens periodically. Hopefully it doesn't happen too often. But there are so many different permutations of full and partial member withdrawals, withdrawals done with stock or stock and cash, what stocks to select, how to pay them out, what happens when the withdrawal crosses the club's tax year into the next. So there are a lot of different variations of processing member withdrawals that you got to be aware of. So many, in fact, that we've done our own webinar, a full webinar just on member withdrawals. So where we spend a good half an hour, 40 minutes going over in detail how to calculate withdrawals, what are the considerations that you might want to think about. We will point you, of course, to our member withdrawal scenario calculator, which is a great tool. It's available in the wizards section of accounting. It's available in the withdrawals and the people section. So we really like you to use it because it lays out in detail the recommended and non-recommended scenarios for any partial or full withdrawal. We will then identify securities that are most suitable if you're looking to transfer securities, because they're different. The securities that you might transfer in a full withdrawal are going to be different from the ones in a partial withdrawal if you're concerned about the benefits to both the withdrawing partner and the partnership. So there are different considerations, a lot of complexities to the member withdrawal process, but we have developed some tools, and there's some help guidance as well that will assist you in this process. So we point you towards those first of all, and then we'll do our best to help you after that. There was a question in the chat box about what's the date to use when you're processing withdrawal of a deceased member. And again, it all depends on your partnership agreement, but the suggested partnership agreement from Better Investing and ICLUBcentral says that the death of a partner is deemed a full withdrawal as of the date on which the partnership receives the news about the passing. And then from there, you just process it like a full withdrawal. You even make the check payable in the member's name. You don't get fancy and write it to the spouse or other assumed heir. You want to make sure that you handle things according to the letter and law of your partnership agreement when you're calculating those unfortunate situations. So let's talk now about the securities tasks, the various stock and other security related transactions that you would undertake on a fairly occasional basis. You're probably pretty familiar with recording a buy of a stock or other security in your club. We do suggest that if this is a new security to your club, that as soon as you enter this transaction, that you go to the security settings to verify the specific settings for that new security. Now, sometimes there might also be a case where the symbol is not recognized. If we don't have it in our database of stocks and ETFs and mutual funds, we might not recognize that, or it could be that you misentered that symbol. So that's also something that would happen. You can still enter a transaction for a security that has a wrong ticker symbol or that is not recognized by our database, but just keep in mind that unless that symbol is corrected, or that you might have to enter manual price updates. This happens occasionally. We know clubs that own so-called private securities that might be not publicly traded. Might be a community bank that you own shares in because you're a customer or something like that, and that's fine. But you just have to keep in mind that those prices are not going to get updated on an automatic basis. You're going to manually have to enter those. So that's about the only gotcha on the record a buy security. A sell security transaction is very similar. There is at the top, there is a sell all link. If you're getting rid of a security, we suggest clicking that sell all. That will fill in the number of shares sold. And this is especially true if you're holding fractional shares, such as for a dividend reinvestment plan where you're completely getting rid of it. Use the sell all button. Don't try to type in the digits, because if you make a minor typo in the 5th decimal place of the number of shares that are being sold, it's going to mess up your data. You're going to have discrepancies. You're going to have stocks that continue to show up on your valuation statement with 0 shares, even though you think you sold it all. So use that sell all link. Otherwise, enter the number of shares that were sold. If you are not selling the entire position, you will need to select the lots from which the sold shares are taken. So in this case, you've got 110 shares of Gilead. If you were selling 55 shares here, when you click the submit button, you'll go to another screen that says, all right, here are the different lots. You bought Gilead 3 or 4 times. Which shares are you selling? Which lots are you pulling those shares from? Now, the default is always FIFO, which is first in, first out. When you enter that sale transaction on your broker and instruct the broker to use shares from specific lots, then you would use the same lots here when you record the sell transaction. But the default is FIFO. So we've seen clubs that think they're being smart and they issue the sell order for half their position. Then they come here and they select different lots to optimize or minimize the capital gains, and find out at year end that the broker has used the FIFO method. Because that's the default and you didn't instruct them otherwise. And so now the basis differs on what's being reported to the IRS from what's in your club books, and you got to come back and re-enter that sale security transaction. So that's the gotcha that you should be aware of when you're recording a sell transaction, making sure that you're selecting the appropriate lots. You can't just make it up. There are specific rules that the IRS wants you to consider. And the FIFO rule is key. Now, for mutual funds, you can use the average basis method. You don't have to specify specific lots, but for stocks, you can't use that particular method. So again, more fuel for our case to avoid fractional shareholdings and dividend reinvestment plans in an investment club, because they do create problems in this area that we see quite a bit in terms of reconciling the shares that are sold and the lots that those shares were chosen from. And if you didn't sell all of them, or if you miskeyed the number of shares that were sold. So all sorts of kind of gotchas to be aware of as you're entering those transactions.
Doug,
Yes,
just
Russell.
one thing, when informing the broker, a lot of brokers now you're doing it online and they have a tax lot selection, and you can select a default one, and the person who actually put it in the order may forget what that was. So you're going to need to remember and check with the people who are actually doing the trade and what was the lot selection that was transmitted to the broker. A lot of times that actually even happened to me. I had switched and the broker sold a different lot than I thought. So I had to go back and amend my sell transaction because of that.
Yep, thanks. That's good clarification. On the record a cash distribution screen, this is what are often thought of as dividends. However, a lot of securities don't actually pay dividends, they make distributions, and a dividend is a type of distribution. So I like people to kind of recognize that a distribution is what you receive from many securities, and a dividend is one type of distribution. So on this screen, it's important to keep in mind that this is where you enter a dividend from. Any dividend that's paid by a security has to be entered in the security section, because we need to record the payout date, the ex-dividend date, and the type of the distribution here. If you got $12 in cash dividends and you entered it as cash income of $12, we wouldn't be able to tie it back to the underlying security that it was paid, that was paying it, and we have to be able to report dividends that qualify for lower tax treatment, even though most taxpayers don't qualify for that lower tax rate. Some may still do. So it's important that your records are accurate. If you don't enter your cash dividends on this screen, but enter them in the cash account screen, your year-end tax reporting from your broker is not going to be accurate. So, or is not going to match your broker's reports are going to be accurate, your books are not going to be. So you want to make sure that they're matched here. It's also important that you enter the correct ex-dividend date. Please don't make it up, but you can look it up. There's a link to find the ex-dividend date once you enter security. We will pre-populate this if we are able to. Once you select the security and the payout date, we will try to find the ex-dividend date in our database and the amount and populate it, so you get to verify that information here. Now, as I mentioned, a distribution might be a dividend, but a distribution might also include other types of distributions, such as capital gains, short-term, long-term, return of capital, interest, etc. So if a security pays a distribution that includes capital gains or return of capital, you can add them to this screen, the subcategories, by clicking on that add another distribution type to the transaction link at the bottom. So this is common for securities like real estate investment trusts. At year end, you'll need to come back and record all of the dividends, or edit all the dividends that you entered, and make sure that the distribution type matches what the REIT announced at year end as to the dispensation of their income for the year. So this screen is something that you'll be familiar with, probably more than many others, if you have any dividends whatsoever that are being paid. Now, likewise, the reinvestment of a distribution screen, if you're using dividend reinvestment either through a dividend reinvestment plan or a synthetic dividend reinvestment plan at a broker, this is where instead of receiving dividends as cash, you receive a dividend, and then immediately that cash is used to purchase additional fractional shares of the underlying stock that paid the distribution, paid the dividend. So in this case, this screen is really, there's nothing fancy about it. It is a combination of a receipt of a dividend or distribution and a purchase of shares. So the dividends that are paid out, that are reinvested, are taxable, even though you never get the cash, but they add to your position by purchasing fractional shares. Again, my recommendation is avoid using dividend reinvestment. Take the dividends as cash, add them to your pool of capital, and invest in your next security, because you're going to have a lot of issues when it comes time to sell the security and reconcile all the different tax lots. It's going to get complicated very quickly. Even worse is if you had a real estate investment trust and you were reinvesting that distribution, because at year end, you've got to now redo all of the distribution, the reinvestments, to change the type and to break it out into 3 or 4 different quarterly transactions instead of one quarterly reinvestment transaction. So it gets very complicated very quickly for REITs or MLPs or limited partnerships. So use this screen with caution, and if you want to keep your sanity and keep your job simple as treasurer, I suggest avoiding dividend reinvestment altogether. The record stock split screen is pretty straightforward. You can enter the number of shares held after the split, or you can enter the split ratio. And so either one, it'll calculate the other. If it's a 2-to-1 split ratio, the shares after split will be populated with double the number of shares. And likewise, in a reverse split, you would be going the other way. So the shares after the split will be fewer than you had before the split. There is a link on the record a stock split page that will allow you to look up the details. So if you suspect that there's a stock split, you can actually look it up, because you notice that the stock fell half in price. You're like, what the heck happened? Maybe in that case, if it's really very close to a 50% price drop, it means that there was a stock split. So the price per share has fallen in half, but you have twice as many shares, so the value is the same afterwards. So this one, the only kind of gotcha here is that many brokers, if you had fractional shares, or if the split would result in owning less than a whole share, they won't give you less than a whole share. So they, in effect, sell that fractional share and give you cash in lieu of the fractional share. Internally, it's calculated as a sale of that fractional share, but there is a cash the amount that you need to enter when you record the stock split in order for things to come out correctly here. So you don't have to worry about entering the split ratio and the shares after the split. So you can, figure out what makes it work according to the situation that you're dealing with, and refer to the help if you need to. Again, recording mergers and takeovers and spin-offs and other kind of corporate actions. There are a number of transactions: record a merger with cash. And it's amazing in the last 20 years how accountants have devised so many different ways of handling transactions and takeovers and mergers and spinoffs, so that there are distributions and ticker symbol changes and cash payments and securities that are tendered for sale and all sorts of different ways of calculating them. Fortunately, Russell Malley is on the job, and he writes up instructions for mergers and spinoffs, and so you can find those on the FAQ, frequently asked questions module, that's linked from my iClub, but the address is www.iclub.com/FAQ, and there is a separate category for transactions, and that will include all of the instructions on how to enter those mergers and spinoffs. If you can't find the instructions, it's something that happened pretty recently, then write into support and we will get on the case, and Russell will generally write up those instructions and publish them and forward a copy to you so that you can record them properly. But we, again, there are a lot of different permutations of these types of transactions, and we did a whole webinar where we looked at nothing but these kind of corporate actions and some of the common ones and the problems and the gotchas. So for that, it might be worth checking that out on our YouTube channel if you are trying to enter one of these kinds of transactions. I mentioned previously that the update security settings is something that you should review for new securities that your club purchases, but it's also a good idea at least once a year. We've added this to our year-end tasks list to edit the security settings, to review them for all the stocks that you own. You can edit the name, the ticker symbol, the exchange, the type of security, and there are advanced settings, including the country and the quote symbol. This is great because sometimes our database has company names that are all capital, or where company or incorporated is written out in full, and or part of the company name is truncated because it's too long. Here's where you can edit it and kind of clean it up. So I like to take the incorporateds off the end of the company names. I like to take the companies or corps out as well, corporation abbreviation out as well. It just makes for a cleaner valuation statement in other reports when you don't have these very, very, very long names. Automatic data processing, everyone knows it as ADP, which is the ticker symbol as well. I would rather see ADP on the report than automatic data process, and then it cuts off, right? Because it's too long. The symbol is what we use to update your valuations on a monthly basis. The exchange generally is going to be New York or OTC, which includes NASDAQ. In our price database, doesn't differentiate between NASDAQ traded stocks and other over-the-counter stocks. You can change that. It doesn't impact anything. It's for information only. But the securities type field is very important. The security types include common stock, real estate investment trusts, ETFs and mutual funds, partnerships, bonds, and it's important that you identify the type security correctly, and there's an other option. So there are many securities for which you've got to watch out. For instance, commodity ETFs or master limited partnerships or real estate investment trusts. And if you don't identify the security correctly here, your tax forms are not going to be correct. So it's really vital that you do that. We're working on more guidance to help you make sure that you've identified these types of securities accurately here as well. The country code or country drop-down list here is for any foreign security that you own. You need to identify the country of origin. The IRS has helpfully defined a foreign corporation as any corporation that's not a US corporation. So just because it trades on a US exchange doesn't mean it's a US corporation. So there are plenty of pharmaceutical companies that trade in Israel or Ireland or the UK that trade on US exchanges, but they're not US corporations. Those dividends from those companies are going to be treated differently tax-wise, and you need to report them separately on your 1065. So in order to help accommodate that, we've had this country field where you select the country of any stock that is not a US stock. The default is the United States, but it's your responsibility to edit it there. And then the quote symbol is here if you are using the program to track multiple lots of the same security, but you really want to see them on separate lines on the valuation statement. You can change the symbol up above in the basic settings to include something like a number. So in this case, it's Royal Bank of Canada. The ticker is RY. We can make that symbol at the top be RY, leave the quote symbol at the bottom be, I'm saying RY1, RY2, RY3 for 3 different lots. Down below, the quote symbol would be the same for all of them. The quote symbol is where we get the price for your valuations using that, not the above symbol. So that is really important, a little tweak, an advanced tweak that you can use or not, depending on your preferences. But that's all accomplished here in the Update Security Settings screen. So finally, let's talk about troubleshooting tools. Hopefully you won't have too much need for this particular tool, but we do have a very, very, very robust search transactions tool that's available in the accounting summary page. In the left menu, there is a view edit transactions link. Select that and you can select the period and type of transaction. Is it a cash transaction, a member transaction, or a security transaction? And then there are advanced fields that include any text matching, any amounts to look for, or dates the transaction was entered, which is interesting. Not the date the transaction occurred on, but when did you enter it? And so that can be very useful as well to help diagnose and pinpoint problems with data entry where your balances don't match. If you can come here, you can search for all of the transactions in a particular period where the date is in a range or whether they were entered in a range. So you can see, you look at everything that you entered in the last month and you see, oh, look at this one. I entered it on May 1st, 2021, but I dated it April 17th, 2012, because I inverted, I transposed the last 2 digits. I was typing too fast. And so that's why your balances were off. So this is a very useful feature, help you kind of diagnose problems and view them by cash, security, member type in particular accounts. So again, it's in the summary section. So it's very useful to help with the troubleshooting of potential problems that you might have. So we've got time for really briefly a couple of quick questions if you have any. I see a lot of, I see Russell and Sean have been busy answering a lot of the questions that have come out. Eric asked, can non-administrators use the search? Yes, and non-administrators can search for transactions. They can view transactions. They can't edit, delete, change transactions. So that's the breakdown. The transparency rules that we follow allow for members to see all of the transactions at any time, to see all the reports at any time, but only designated personnel can make modifications to those particular reports. Bonnie says, when can you delete paper files? Should backups be kept on a backup drive forever? Can you shred those paper files? Generally, the general rule of thumb for paper files, it's been changing. You should have 7 years of records at least for your investment club, whether they're paper files or electronic files now. Again, if you're not getting paper statements, you should be saving those PDFs in a secure location and archiving them regularly. And there's no need to save the paper files now if you have electronic records. Now, however, You got to make sure that you keep the electronic records. So you've got to devise systems where those records are kept safe. Again, a backup that's more than 2 years old of your data is not going to be very useful if you've got one that's 6 months old and another one that's a year old and another one's 18 months old, right? You've got multiple redundant points of recovery that you can identify. So again, after a certain point, you want to make sure you don't need to maintain those files wherever, forever. Thumb drives, USB drives, and cloud storage space are pretty inexpensive, pretty secure, and can help you devise an appropriate system for backup of that information. And there are a lot of different thoughts and theories. And again, we've done one of the webinars we did last year, the year before, was on disaster recovery and disaster preparedness in investment clubs, where we dug a little deeper into suggestions for making sure that you're protected. You know, having a desk drawer full of USB drives with backups on them right next to your computer isn't very useful if your house burns down or floods, right? So that's one of the things you want to keep in mind. You want to have non-localized backups as well. So that helps you kind of devise that appropriate strategy. And if multiple people, you know, if you've got an administrator and a treasurer, they can each make sure that they've got a current backup. That way, if someone's incapacitated and that backup is needed, there's another source for it. So, you know, think through the different permutations and protect yourself. And we're here to help as best as possible. And certainly, we protect your data from your house burning down or flooding, or getting your computer getting washed away in you know, a hurricane, something like that. That's the benefit of a cloud-based service like my iClub. But you know, we can't protect your club from a member, you know, sitting down and mistakenly hitting the wrong key and all of a sudden deleting a lot of data inadvertently because they didn't understand. So that's for you to do your best to come up with a reasonable storage solution that works, that's something you can easily repeat, and that your members of your club understand and know where they need to go to access that particular information. All right, when you need help, here are our resources. Our webinars continue on the third Tuesday of the month. For investment clubs, we've got our FAQ page. One of the great benefits of my iClub is every page has a help link, and the vast majority of those go to specific information for that page. We've been continuing to develop the website. As you all know, last month we released our new SSG Plus links for the portfolio reports, and we're continuing to collect feedback on those. But that information and refine some of those reports, but we do appreciate all of your feedback and comments and suggestions that you've made for that particular tool. If you have any further comments, suggestions, problems, trouble, feel free to email me directly, and we'll do our best to get back to you. So thanks to Russell and Sean in the back office, and thanks to all of you for turning out tonight. We'll be back next month with a look at annual tasks of investment club treasurers. So we'll look at the things that you do maybe once a year in conjunction with your closing the books perhaps, or on another annual schedule. So join us in June for that webinar. Thanks again. We'll see you the next time.